Wisp Sports Radio, the voice of women in sport.
This is episode 21 of the FAB podcast on Wisp Sports Radio. Wisp Sports Radio is brought to you by Highlands Earache Drops.
Earaches are one of the primary causes for doctor visits, with over 30 million visits per year. After you've been diagnosed with an earache by a physician, try Highlands Homeopathic Earache Drops and Tablets. Highlands Homeopathic Ear Drops and Tablets provide natural relief to help you get back to doing what you love. Visit highlands.com/ear-pain to find a retailer near you. Claims are based on traditional homeopathic practice, not accepted medical evidence, not FDA evaluated. Read and follow label directions.
Excuse me.
The FAB podcast is the weekly show brought to you by Females in Athletic Business for women in the sports business, where we believe that women in sport deserve equal coverage. Welcome to this week's episode. My name is Kristin Ray, and I am the founder of Females in Athletic Business and one of your hosts of the FAB podcast. So for today's episode, we are joined by Mia Corsini, Director of Events for U.S. Figure Skating. She's here to talk to us about the ins and outs of being a meetings and events professional in the sports industry. Welcome, Mia.
Thanks, Kristin.
So, Mia, we usually like to start each episode by having our guests give a little bit of a background about their journey, kind of to where they are in the sports business industry. So I know a little bit about your past, but start a little bit by telling us kind of where your sports love came from and then how you kind of came to this point in your journey.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am from Massachusetts. I'm from a Boston suburb. So like most Bostonians or adjacent, Bostonians adjacent, sports is a big part of us growing up. Red Sox, Bruins, Patriots, Celtics. So, I grew up in a household with my dad, and sports was it all the time. And so from a very early age, I felt the impact that sports had on people. So it was always an interest, from a fan's perspective and growing up in that environment. And then I also grew up figure skating. That was my primary sport and, passion. But then also dabbled in a few other things, some soccer, some basketball, some softball. I was a connoisseur of these sports, but was really horrible at all of them.
That's one thing we have in common. I was definitely good at one thing and horrible at most of the others that I tried.
Well, and you know what they say sometimes about people who aren't that great. Sometimes, they're able to become good teachers or, provide a different perspective. So, the foundation.
Or I say it makes us more able to appreciate the amazing athletes that we are around every day.
Look at that. I like that approach. I'm going to use that next time. So not ever really finding my niche outside of figure skating. It was a constant in life. And, you appreciate the ups and the downs and the impact it has on you culturally. And obviously growing up in Boston, we had a lot of exciting things going on, always with sports. So that was a big thing as a kid. But, fast forwarding a little bit to going to college, I felt like a lot of kids do when they graduate high school, that I had to figure out what I was going to do in a rush. And I needed to declare a major right away. And that was tough. And I feel like a lot of people feel that, even young adults, adults who are in their career, like you're just forced into declaring what you're going to do and what your intentions are and what your career path is going to look like. And that's challenging. So I ended up in pre-pharmacy because I felt like I was good at chemistry and the starting salary after reviewing it. But that starting salary doesn't include your student loans. So, piggybacking on that sport thing from my childhood, I decided to go to the University of South Carolina because I wanted a big school with big athletics. And it was still on the East Coast. So, it felt really attainable. And I enrolled in their pre-pharmacy program. So a couple weeks into my first semester, just talking around with people, I found out that sports management entertainment was a major at the school. And that was kind of like a earth shift for me.
Like a light bulb went off.
Yeah, I had no idea that that was even an option. And, maybe that was because I felt like I was rushed to make a decision, or maybe that was because I just wasn't doing the proper discovery at the time. I mean, I was 17 years old. I don't know if I had all the resources to do that, but that light bulb went off. And I said, I got to figure out how to get into that program. And this was probably in October. So it was pretty early in. And a big part of that was selling it to my parents because they also were very appreciative of that starting salary of pre-pharmacy. You want your kids to be successful. So they were like, she's got a path. She's, 4 years of undergrad, 2 years of pharmacy school. She's got this. So I kind of consider that major switch to be my first event planning job because I had to get my logistics in order to present this to them. And that included securing an internship. I had to show them that there were opportunities here. It wasn't enough just to say, I want to do this and here's why. I had to provide the roadmap. And so I was lucky enough that I was able to secure a position with the Special Olympics in Massachusetts. And they had a variety, marketing, public relations, events. And it happened at that time frame that only events was available. And I said, I can do that. That sounds great. So I kind of fell into that first internship in events. It wasn't something that I had an immediate interest in, but over the course of that summer, working for a really small nonprofit, I got to do a little bit of everything, and I was hooked from the very beginning because, I feel like I'm pretty strong administratively. I'm really good at communicating what I want and what I need. And I've been like that since I was, 3 years old. So that's been a huge asset to me in the events world. And I found that there was a place for me. Even though I was 18 years old and I had just kind of made a huge shift, it was so comforting to know this works and I can really do this. So that was kind of my first step into events and still really young. And from that point on, I, figured I was going to do anything and everything in this events world to figure out if it was my right spot. And so I finished up that internship. I went back to school. The next summer came and went. I got an internship with US Club Soccer. And I was doing operations and logistics for them. Again, had tried to play soccer, not successful at all. I was really good laying in the field and picking flowers and grass. But outside of that, there wasn't a whole lot of skill and knowledge. So that was definitely a learning curve. But showed me that I could work in multiple sports, even if there wasn't a strong background. And that was a hard internship because you were out on the field every day. You were the first one in and the last one out. And you were, setting up tents and you were making sure the officials were all there and you were setting up the benches and the water orders. I mean, it goes on and on and on. And so, it was another layer of, okay, there's a lot more to this, but I can do it. I can really do this. And so that was a really great opportunity. And that actually carried over from my sophomore to junior year and led me to my first full-time job at Anthony Travel because US Club Soccer was actually a contracted, organization with Anthony Travel. So it was a really nice transition. I wouldn't say that I'm lucky because I feel like I pounded the pavement and really did anything and everything to kind of build up my resume. So I think that even though it may seem like it was a pretty seamless transition, it definitely took a lot of work from my end too. And, in between that, I got lucky enough to actually get a contract position over at the London Olympics. So that was right after I graduated college. And so I graduate in May and I go over to work at the games and I work for an Australian event services company, but I'd been hired by Anthony Travel already. And, they had pretty much held a spot for me, that's the lucky part of it. Like, I don't think that's very common. I don't know if I'd be able to accommodate that in my, team now. Say, okay, we're going to hire you now, but we're going to let you go do this thing and you come back.
Right. Well, we should say, neither you or I are still paid probably by Anthony Travel, but both of us have worked there, and both of us, I think, have enjoyed our time at Anthony Travel and would recommend young women look at their jobs page if they're trying to work in sports, because it's a wonderful organization to work with, and they have a lot of openings a lot of time because their company is growing so much. So take it from Mia and I, because it's a great organization to work for.
Well, and, again, another Anthony Travel plug. And yes, we aren't being paid for this, but you are going to learn if you're going to work in the events industry. There are so many moving parts, and I always refer to it as the other duties as assigned. Sure, I have a set job responsibility. I have a plan for each day, but there's so much stuff that pops up. And one of those things is always going to be travel and logistics that go hand in hand with travel. And you're never going to be able to get exposure to that without working for a company, like Anthony Travel. Sure, you can read up, you can, study all you want, but until you're in that seat and you're, in some cases providing that customer service too, I can't say enough about that opportunity. It was really quick for me. I was only there for about 9 months, and that's because the opportunity with figure skating popped up. And with that being, kind of my passion from when I was young and a true event operations position in this sport that I felt so strongly towards, I couldn't give it up. So I did depart Anthony Travel a little early, but what I took from them is paying dividends.
Well, that is so interesting because I was only there for almost the exact same amount of time.
Oh, really?
Because then my dream job kind of opened up at the same time. And so that does say a lot about that organization as well, that they are still so supportive of me and my endeavors, even though some organizations would not have taken that so well, departing so quickly. But so moving on from our plug of Anthony Travel. So now here you are, director of events for U.S. Figure Skating. Early on, when I started the organization called Females in Athletic Business, it became really clear to me when speaking with our student members how big of an interest the events side of our sports business industry was especially to young women. And talk a little bit about the demand that you've seen from young women that want to enter the event side, because I get that a lot. I'm getting that a lot from young women. So are you seeing the same demand?
I am. I think that we have grown a lot as an organization and specifically as a department over the last 5 years when I've been here. So I'm seeing this really high level of interest from young women, who are in college, who are ready to graduate. Some of them being former athletes who are transitioning from high school to college and trying to navigate that as well. And honestly, I couldn't be happier because at the end of the day, and I'm a little biased, but women get things done, and we're doers. And I think that there's a lot of female traits that work really nicely into an event planner position. And some of our nuances that just come along, with our gender, it works really well. And I don't mean to sound biased because males can get it done too, but I love the interest of females. And just with sports in general, there's such a boys club perception. And in some cases, that is a reality. So I feel like as a woman working in an industry, and in my specific case, I'm working in a sport that has a predominantly female demographic, and that's in fans and in participants. I need to do my part to change that perception and to continue to provide opportunities for exposure and for people who actually show that interest to understand what it's like. We were able to connect with FAB on your internship opportunity this past February, and we got Jasmine Patterson, who is a member of the organization, to come out and support our synchronized skating championships in Portland. And it was an experience like that, which, sometimes we're too busy to even think about setting up an internship. No, you have to make the time to do it, because having Jasmine on site to get an outsider's perspective, for one, is huge at any level of the game. But to see somebody who is so young and driven and motivated and is just willing to do anything, you're like, that interest is going to go places.
Oh yeah, she is an absolute rock star in our industry.
She is.
And she was so excited, and you all at US Figure Skating were so generous to provide her with, an experience to bring her along at your championships and show her the way, in regards to event planning in the sports business industry. And ironically, we go full circle because now she is working for Anthony Travel.
Yeah. God.
And so
right.
but they saw the same thing that you saw in her and that I see in her. And she's unique because, like you said, she is one of the young women who is absolutely willing to do whatever it takes to get as much knowledge and experience in this industry to make sure her dreams of working in this industry are absolutely going to be fulfilled. But let me ask you this. Would you say that most of the young women that you talk to about working in events in the sports industry have an accurate idea of what the job entails? And I ask this because, having worked a bit in the event side previously, I often have young women tell me that they became interested in it maybe because they saw it on a show or a movie or something on TV or in a magazine. And often the way that the event side of the profession, whether it be in special events, sports, corporate events, is portrayed in a very like glamorous, fancy way. And that's not always an accurate picture. So when you talk to these young women, are they coming to you with an accurate portrayal of the industry, or are you finding it's something you've got to help them shift a little?
You know, I wish I could say they were, but I think it's kind of a 50-50, and it goes back to everybody's a little bit different. So it really depends on their on the individual and what their exposure has been. If it is truly just from TV and film, and maybe they see the wedding planner and they're like, I can do this and I like sports, so I can do that for sports. That's probably not going to work. And it, kind of goes back to what we were talking about a minute ago with that interest. Interest is great, but it's not enough if you're not willing to put the work in. And that work comes from being hungry and staying hungry, because once you get that first realization that you might not be out there for that confetti coming down championship trophy moment, because you're probably putting a fire out backstage, whether it's literal or physical, because it happens.
Yep.
I mean, that's a big pill to swallow. I mean, a lot of people, I think, go into, this idea of having this grand event job and working the Olympics or working NCAA tournaments. And they're like, I'm going to be in it. I'm going to be with the athletes. I'm going to be next to those coaches. I'm going to be a big part of this. And that is a piece of it. Those personal relationships and those connections you can make with the participants, the spectators, the athletes, whoever, is huge. But you're still there doing a job, and you really are first one in, last one out. And it can be painful.
Literally and physically.
Yeah. All I can say is get some orthotics in those shoes. You're going to want some comfortable shoes. But, it goes back to somebody like a Jasmine. She wants it and she gets it. So sometimes you have to take those opportunities, whether they're good or they're bad, and then figure out where that interest goes, because your realistic approach, it might not work, and it might not be a good fit.
Well, and kind of to build on what you said, and also your experience as a young college freshman, I think is very valuable, because you mentioned how you felt the pressure early on to declare a major, tell the world what you intended to do with your life 4 years from then. And I think that I still think that's a thing. I work with a lot of young women every day, and I still think that's a thing that they feel the pressure from. And I, like you, when it was my turn to do that, had no clue that sports management or sports business or sports anything was even an option at the university that I went to. And at the time, I don't know that it was. I know that it was a master's program, but I don't know that it was an undergraduate option. But the point was, I didn't know whether or not it was at all. And that's why Females in Athletic Business and other organizations and other podcasts that we've talked about on this podcast are so important. And so if you're listening out there, you are a young woman, or maybe you're a mentor of a young woman, give these resources out and take advantage of the resources, because these are the things that will help you not waste time, if you will. Luckily, you figured it out pretty quickly. It's not that I feel like I wasted time, because every opportunity that I've had from graduation on led me to this point, which is wonderful. But if the goal of this podcast and conversations like this is to make sure that we can get women to do it as intentionally and in a focused way as possible. So I did like that message. Luckily you got there pretty quickly. You figured it out pretty quickly.
Well, in a way, but I mean, I still think at my age and at my position, I came in as a competitions coordinator. I was bright eyed, young and excited, and this was going to be my dream job. And in a lot of ways, like you said, it still is, but I'm still figuring it out. And I'm the, director of events, and my job is ever evolving, ever changing. And that's part of the fun too. When you're working in events, every day is so different. So just because you start at point A, whether that's a job position, a title, a set salary, the sky's the limit. And that sounds really corny, but if you are a go-getter and you're hungry, it's going to work out. It really, really will. And you've got the time to make mistakes, learn from them, and truly figure out what you want. And once you're in a place that you can communicate that to, not only yourself, but to your leadership and your team members, you're so much better off. And that takes time.
And doors will open for you too when they see that about you.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
So tell us, those of us, I'm an absolute figure skating, absolute fan. Like, you have come to the right place to talk figure skating. But for those of us who aren't, talk about some of the annual events that U.S. Figure Skating handles and hosts, and maybe a little bit about how some of them maybe are the ones we see on TV, but then there are so many that we don't see on TV, and the size of these events that you're handling, because I'm sure it's not just the fancy ones that everyone watches on TV.
No, it sure isn't. Our two biggest events annually is Skate America, which is a part of the ISU Grand Prix series. So that's a fall competition series. So those are your highest level athletes, the people you're used to seeing at the Olympics. They compete in the Grand Prix series throughout the fall, and then have a final in December. So we host one of those competitions in the series annually. That's Skate America. This year it's in Everett, Washington. So if anybody's out there in Washington State and wants to volunteer, let me know. Skate America is a nationally televised broadcast event. Our partner is NBC, so that's something that you will see on NBC. Likewise, U.S. Championships, which is our qualifying pipeline. That's kind of that last step if you're an elite level athlete to get named to the world team, the Olympic team. That's an annual event that's held in January. This year it's in Detroit at the new Little Caesars Arena. We're super excited about that.
Woo woo, holler to Detroit.
We're giving some serious love to Detroit this year. We're there for our U.S. championships, and then also our synchronized skating championships, which are the next year. And, that's kind of a good segue, because synchronized skating is our developing discipline right now. I mean, it has been around for almost half a century now. It was actually founded in America by Dr. Porter, who's based out of Michigan as well, or was based out of Michigan, I should say. And it is a really, really fun sport, but it's not something that people get to see on TV. And it's something that we're vying to get into the Olympics, as we move forward. It's not quite there yet, but very, very hopeful. So that's not something that folks are going to see on TV, but they much like our singles, pairs, and dance athlete, have their own qualifying structure and lead up to that U.S. championship. So those are your high level ones. And then pretty much, I'd say every other year we're hosting a world championship, or this year it's the Four Continents Championship, which is in Anaheim. And that's for everybody but Europe, because Europe holds their own European championship. So that's prior to the world championships. And these events, these international ones outside of U.S. championships, they're probably, they're a week long. Skate America is a little bit smaller. We're looking at about 50 athletes with for continents, we're looking at close to 175 international athletes coming in, competing in those four disciplines. But then for me, it trickles all the way down to our itty bitties who are just getting started with Learn to Skate. And that's kind of how my job has changed a little bit over the years. We've started working on our own event management system. We refer to it as EMS in-house. It's not public yet, but it's streamlining the planning and execution of events, and is providing a data repository for us to not only help these local clubs who are, primarily volunteers and working after 5 o'clock when they leave their day jobs to put on these events and make some money for their local skaters, but also provide a snapshot of the sport for our office, for our high performance department, our athlete development folks, to better focus our efforts. So for me, what I've learned the most, it's all about working smarter and not harder. So with this project, my shift has gone from, I still play a support role with those larger competitions that you see on TV, but now I'm really in tune with our grassroots. And honestly, I couldn't be happier. I love being at the big events. I loved being in San Jose this past year and supporting our U.S. championships, our in-arena production, and everything down to our accreditation room. We have our hand in, but if we don't get people at these smaller competitions, these learn to skate little guys, the sport stops.
Right. There's no future if you can't invest in the little ones.
Exactly. So I've been really kind of jazzed up by being involved in the grassroots component, and being a little bit more involved with the local competitions, which for some people isn't that alluring. We talked about the confetti moment, the championship trophy. For some people, that's what the event world means to them. For me, it's definitely shifted, and I'm happy to be in this spot. But, I started that way too. I started, the season we were leading up into 2014, when we were going to name the Olympic team. And I was so excited to see that happen. I didn't see it happen because I was backstage dealing with something else. And that was my first lesson of perception versus reality. But you know what? I like this side of it too. I don't need to be out there for every single big moment, because I know I'm supporting that big moment backstage. So I think I found my niche with the little ones.
Oh, good. Well, I think that answer kind of will feed into one of our last questions here. I think when a lot of young women, or even women coming out of college, or even women looking to switch careers, when they think about working in sports industry, one of the first things that they might think about is working for their favorite team or their college. And that's a supernatural way for your mind to go. But a lot of us don't often consider looking for jobs within a sports governing body, like you're talking about U.S. figure skating, for example, or, there's one for gymnastics. There's one for every sport. Really, there is. I know we all think of the NFL, the NHL, MLB, but even for the smaller sports, soccer, gymnastics, things like that, there's still a governing body that really is, the absolute be all end all in terms of rules and events and things like that. So talk a little bit about the pros and cons of working for an organization like U.S. Figure Skating. And you kind of, in the last question, you made your point for the positive part about working for an organization like that. Do you ever think about, I know you're kind of a figure skating specialist, so there isn't necessarily, like a local team or something like that. But have you ever thought about branching outside of your comfort zone and getting outside the governing bodies? And maybe what kind of things do you think you might like about something other than working for U.S. Figure Skating?
That's a good question. I mean, just going back to the beginning with the professional team and how that is just the natural thing when you think about sports. I mean, my dad still wants me to work for the Boston Bruins. And quite frankly, I do too. But the reality of that is minimal, because I know that I'm not going to find an events job within the Boston Bruins organization that is going to fit my skill set, but also meet my needs. Like I've now become kind of an events junkie in a way where, I talk about the EMS project. Like, I love that. I love being able to work on something that hopefully is going to make everyone's jobs easier, and they'll want to host events because they've got this tool and they've got this process. I don't know if I'm going to find that with a professional sports team. You mentioned NGBs. I think one of the cons of working for a national governing body like figure skating is we are volunteer-based organizations. So while we have a leadership structure internally, we have an executive director, we have a plethora of senior directors, and then, the pyramid goes down. We also have a president and a board of directors who we are all reporting to. And then from that board of directors, we then have committees. So the way I think of it is I have a boss here in the office, my senior director, and then I've got the chair of the competitions committee, who's my volunteer boss, if you will. And that's pretty similar across the board with sports that are within the Olympic movement, you are susceptible is not the right word, but your job is really contingent on what these volunteers who are truly figure skating, they're the specialists, right? They grew up in this sport, competing at a very high level in a lot of cases, and know this sport ins and outs. Some of them are coaches, some of them are officials, some of them are former, elite athletes. They're the ones making the rules. And then we have to disseminate those rules into action and best practice and make sure they're being followed. So while I really love the sport, I mean, that checks and balances component of it can be really challenging, because sometimes in the sports world, figure skating or not, rules don't always make sense. And, they were made for a specific instance 10 years ago, and it no longer is valid. However, we can't get to it right now to update it. So this is the way it's going to be. And there's nothing I hate more than hearing, we're going to do it this way because that's the way we've always done it.
Always done it. Yeah.
It makes my skin crawl.
Yeah. Yeah. That is another thing we have in common. Yep.
And I think that a lot of Olympic sports kind of hold on to that. And, that's a really blanket statement. So that's just an opinion. I really can only speak to figure skating because I have been here for 5 years. And this is really my only foray outside of my stint at the London Olympics in this Olympic movement. But I think that really is the challenge is you're sometimes dealing with some old rules. And, you're subject to many different opinions that when if you're working maybe in a professional sports setting, or you're working for, a parks and recreation department, or any other, organization that falls into this bucket, you might be able to be that decision maker. And that might make your life a lot easier. So I don't know. I think that when I think about what else I could do going outside of my comfort zone, events, it feels ingrained in who I am, whether I'm volunteering or I'm working. It's something that I want to do. If I have somebody over for dinner, it's going to be an event. There is going to be some programming. I'm supposed to get married sometime soon. And the idea of putting together a wedding is so daunting to me because I know I'm going to turn into a crazy events person. So it's like, it just is, it's in me. So I don't know what that'll look like outside. So I don't know.
Well, let me tell you what that looks like. As someone I spent 6 years in the hotel industry, handling the in-town visits for athletic teams when they would come in. So it wasn't necessarily production type events, but it was an event in that their stay in the city that I worked in was an event to them. And then now I do a little bit of it in my current job. But as a bride, I think you think you're going to be bridezilla, but the truth is, if you're anything like I was last year, I was like the opposite of bridezilla because I was so clear about what I wanted and needed, and I was able to communicate it well. Like you said, those are two things you're good at, is telling people what you need and how you need it. But I think everyone around me would honestly say I wasn't a bridezilla. So I would maybe give yourself a little more credit than you're giving yourself at this point, and and just.
I need your playbook.
And I have it. That is a thing that I have so much documentation from my wedding being a planner that, I could do it all again tomorrow like it was nothing. So you're going to be fine.
Well, and that's what I look forward to. But, you think about one of the things about being an event planner is you're detail oriented. Like the devil is in the details. And whether that's documentation or that's communication, I think, sometimes your personality changes with what item you're dealing with when you're planning something, and your tone can change quite a bit. And I'm afraid that my tone in wedding planning is going to be a little aggressive. So So I'm just keeping it on the back burner right now so I can focus a little bit on the figure skating. But I'll get there eventually, and I'll have to talk to you offline about that playbook and how to keep it cool and not, go all DEF CON event planner 5.
Also, aggressive tone is something I've been accused of on many moments in my life. But I will say during the wedding process, not so much. So,
all right.
Before this episode turns into Mia and Kristin personal chatting about all the things we have in common, Mia, why don't you tell our listeners how they can kind of keep track of maybe what you're up to, maybe on social media, and what U.S. Figure Skating is up to in the coming months. If our listeners aren't quite as big of a figure skating fan as I am, maybe tell them how they might grow that part of their interest.
Yeah, absolutely. So, follow us on social, US Figure Skating, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. That's where you're going to get your most up-to-date information about our events. Like I said earlier, we're going to Skate America is in Washington State. It's in, oh my goodness, Everett, Washington. I almost blinked there for a second. Horrible event planner. And then our U.S. championships are in Detroit at the end of January, and our synchronized skating championships a month later. So we're constantly looking for volunteers. I think that is a really great way to become a little more familiar with the sport, and seeing it on that stage, really is a big thing for people. It's one thing to watch it on TV if you're a casual fan or you're flipping through the station. But, if you are, a young professional in this industry and looking for a little bit more exposure to these events, please, please, please volunteer.
And it's a resume builder.
It is a resume builder.
Volunteering in the sports world looks great on a sports resume.
It absolutely does. And you can do that through usfsaonline.org. You just create an account. We capture your information, and then you go to volunteer opportunities. So if that's something that interests anyone, please, please, please check it out. We'd love to have you. On the flip side of that, it's never too late to start skating. Adult skating is actually a huge part of what I do. I help support our adult events across the country. And I find a specific interest in them because those are really the people that give back to the sport. And, they're invested in it. And you remember what it was like to step on the ice for the first time. Some of those people are doing that at 40, at 50, at 60. And it's amazing to work alongside these people. So honestly, the best thing you can do is get out and skate. It's a great workout. I can't say enough on that respect. But I'd say volunteer. Come see us at Skate America, U.S. Championships or Synchro Championships, please.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you taking the time. I appreciate you always being a supporter of females in athletic business, whether it's doing things like this, supporting our internship or our job shadow option that we did with Jasmine last year. I really, really appreciate everything you've done. And thanks again for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having the platform, Kristin. I mean, I didn't have this when I was being pressured into deciding what I wanted to do. I didn't even have this in college. I didn't always feel like there was within my major, which was sport focused, that there was really an outlet for me as a young professional. And so, if we can do our part to keep that information flowing and just be a resource and, mentor, so huge, anything for it. Happy to be a part of it.
All right. Well, thank you again to Mia.
Conversations from the world of women's sports. This is Wisp Sports Radio.
And Wisp Sports Radio can be found on any podcast app. So follow Wisp Sports on social media at Wisp Sports. Please give us a 5-star review on iTunes to help promote coverage of women in sport. Thanks for listening and supporting women in sport everywhere. And to follow Females in Athletic Business or this podcast, use @FAB Sports.org on social media. The FAB podcast is a co-production of Females in Athletic Business and Wisp Sports. Check out Females in Athletic Business at www.fabsportsorg.com. And please visit our sponsors at highlands.com/ear-pain. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll be back next week when we speak with trailblazing sportscaster Lisa Byington as a part of our Women of BTN series. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next week.